She started coming home with the weather still on her coat, as if the rain itself had followed her into our hallway and couldn't let go. She'd place her keys in the ceramic dish a little too gently, like a promise she didn't want to wake, and smile in that soft, distracted way that doesn't belong to the person standing in front of you anymore. The apartment felt bigger those nights, airier, emptier, as if the walls had stepped back a few inches to give the silence room to breathe. We talked about groceries, about deadlines, about the neighbor's new puppy chewing the railing, but never about the way dinner cooled on our plates while our eyes slid past each other like strangers trying not to collide. Infidelity is a pain like no other, they say, but what nobody tells you is that sometimes the pain begins long before the truth has a name. It hums under the lights. It sits in the other chair. It breathes when she sighs without meaning to. On a Tuesday, the elevator stuck between floors for 10 minutes, and she texted me, "Stuck, be late." I stared at the message for the full 10 minutes, unsure why the word late felt like it had too many meanings. Late for dinner, late to apologize, late to admit what I could feel dripping into the carpet. When she walked through the door, the rain had matted her hair to her forehead. She laughed at herself with an apologetic shrug and went straight to shower. I stood by the window and watched a thin river form along the curb downstairs. The city felt distant, as if the traffic 3 streets over belonged to a film I'd once loved and couldn't name now. I made tea. I set her cup by the bathroom door. The steam from the kettle rose and vanished, a small lesson in how warmth disappears without fuss. There were the empty dinners, forks scraping porcelain. Her phone face down, a small square of black on the wood, absorbing light. She had been attentive once, the kind of attentive that notices your favorite spoon has gone missing and will find it under the couch in the next hour. Now she was careful, not attentive. The difference is that carefulness belongs to someone afraid of being seen. I wanted to ask the simple question, is there someone else? But the words felt heavy, like furniture you can't move without asking for help, and there was no one to help me carry them to my mouth. Communication after the affair, after the suspicion, really requires an opening, a tender time set aside, but I didn't know how to schedule my own fear. I rehearsed lines in my head and did nothing. The letter arrived on a Thursday in a plain white envelope with no return address, no stamp that looked familiar, just my name in block letters, a child's certainty in each line. The paper inside smelled faintly of cologne, not mine, and folded in half it looked like something you'd tuck into a high school locker, harmless, ordinary, devastating. I unfolded it standing over the sink, as if I already knew I'd want to wash my hands. The first word was anonymous, written in all caps as if a shout. Then a short paragraph, not cruel, not gloating, almost apologetic. He said he didn't want to hurt me. He said he loved her. He said she'd told him she needed space and that he had believed her. He said he wanted me to know because it wasn't fair. Fair. The faucet dripped. A bus sighed outside. I read it twice like a person checking a diagnosis, hoping a syllable had been misprinted. My knees softened. I sat on the floor, letter in my lap, tiles cold through my jeans. When she came home, I'd placed the letter on the kitchen table the way you place a glass object that might break either way, gently, dead center. She noticed it immediately and paused at the threshold, those keys again, that little sound of metal giving itself up. "What's this?" she asked, the voice of a nurse before she changes a bandage. I watched her read. Her muscles moved beneath her skin like something about to run. "Who?" she started, then stopped, and it was the stopping that told me everything. There is a moment in every confession that belongs to the body, not the mouth. Her shoulders lowered a fraction, as if the lie had finally stepped off them. I felt something hot and nauseating rise in my throat, but my voice came out small. "How long?" She sat. She didn't touch me. She reached for the letter again, not to deny it, but to have something in her hands, while she looked for the words that could make a bridge out of a ruin. "I'm sorry," she said, like it was the first bead on a rosary she would be forced to recite for months. It wasn't supposed to be anything. There's a sentence that makes you want to laugh at funerals. I nodded as if this was administrative. I asked no more questions. The tea kettle began to whisper and then boil, a small theater of panic on the stove. I turned it off and forgot to pour. In the bedroom, the empty chair across from our bed looked suddenly symbolic, as if the apartment had been trying to warn me with props. The lamp threw that pale evening light that makes even sturdy things look breakable. It felt obscene to notice the smell of laundry detergent in that moment, but grief is specific. It catalogs what you'd prefer to miss. She stood in the doorway like a person about to confess to a priest. "We can talk," she said. "I'll tell you everything you want to know." The everything hung there like a storm gathering in a hallway. I didn't know what I wanted to know. I only knew I could hear my heart in my ears, and that every question would make a room I'd have to live in. I slept, not the right word, in the living room that night, the hum of the refrigerator, a lullaby for people who can't be held. The rain chalked gray lines on the window. Traffic thinned. The ceiling was an empty screen where my mind projected every possible scene of them together. The curve of her shoulder I knew by heart, the laugh she used when she was nervous, the way her hand searched for a glass of water in the dark. The imagination is crueler than evidence. Somewhere in the building, a baby cried and then quieted, the mercy of being comforted. My phone lit up with a message from an unknown number, a single line. He wasn't supposed to tell you. I turned it face down and let the apartment breathe. Near dawn, I stood at the window, watching morning begin the difficult work of turning the city into itself again. The light was a softer gray, the kind that forgives edges. Behind me, the letter lay unfolded on the table, a white flag nobody would wave. I pressed my forehead to the glass and felt its coolness as if it could lower a fever. In that quiet with the sink drip counting seconds, I understood that nothing in my life had changed and everything had. The refrigerator hummed, the bus sighed. Somewhere, a key dish was empty. And in the next room, the person I loved breathed in a rhythm I recognized and no longer knew how to match. The doorknob turned softly, hers, awake, or someone else's, uninvited at our threshold, and I couldn't tell which sound the morning had chosen. Sleeplessness isn't dramatic. It's patient. It sits with you through the negotiation of 3 a.m., when your eyes burn and your hands feel like someone else's. The first week tasted like metal, coffee, toast, her apologies, all of it lined with a dull tang as if the air had rusted. She wanted to talk every night. She was suddenly available. She offered information freely when asked, like a careful student following the rubric, and every sentence carried a second life of pain. She would schedule time to talk, she said. We could set aside an hour each evening. Good practice, good intention, but it made me feel like the most human thing we'd ever had become an item on a calendar I didn't remember consenting to. The apartment became a museum of triggers. The blue mug she favored on mornings she felt gentle. The soft sweater he'd once complimented, he liked that color, she admitted without meaning to. Even a pleasant evening out curdled mid-sip when a song came on that she had, months ago, called Ours, and now I had to share it with a ghost wearing my shirt. She tried to guide me back to safer ground. She would reach for my hand and say, softly, I'm here. I believed her. I didn't. Both truths sat beside each other, elbows touching, refusing to give up space. He was kind in his way, whoever he was. That's what the letter suggested. Not a gloat, not a threat, just a plea badly dressed as an explanation. I should have hated him. Some days I did, in a tidy, satisfying way that made my spine feel like it belonged to me again. Other days, hatred required more energy than grief permitted. On those days, he was simply another person who had found her when I was busy washing dishes, paying bills, living in the shallow end of our days. It doesn't excuse anything. It doesn't absolve. It only enlarges the room enough to see where I had been standing when the ceiling started leaking. I walked more, past the bakery that opens early, past the park where morning collects itself on damp benches, past the window of the dance studio, where a janitor mopped mirrored floors that had held other people's joy. Rain came and went, the city rinsed of its color. I learned the names of plants I'd never cared to learn before. I stood at crosswalks and let the cars pass even when it was my turn to go. The body doesn't want to move when it doesn't know where it's going. It wants the world to make the first offer. She answered questions. When did it start? Why him? Did you love him? The last one sat between us like a wire with unknown voltage. She said she didn't know what love meant in that sentence. She said she had been lonely. She said she had been inside our life and could not feel me in it. I wanted to say that I had been inside it too, searching with my hands out in the dark, bumping into chairs and calling her name. But what came out was, I hear you, which is both true and cowardly. There were good hours. It feels wrong to admit that. Hours where we watched something stupid and laughed in the easy way you don't trust anymore. Hours where she brushed my sleeve and my nerve endings sparked in the old pattern muscle memory making its case. But triggers lurk. Even a good evening can tip toward the edge when a thought sneaks in. Did you take him here? The mind is a haunted house with every light switch in the wrong room. She tried to guide me back, and sometimes she did, and other times I wanted to sit in the dark just to prove I had the right to. The second message came a week later, same number. She told me she chose you, 5 words that should have been victory, and instead felt like someone had handed me a medal for a marathon I hadn't trained to run. I stared at it until the letters lost their shapes. I didn't reply. I didn't tell her. It wasn't a secret. It was a boundary I didn't know how to draw. The choice is not the same thing as the return. The door can be closed and still make a draft. At the grocery store, a woman reached for the same brand of coffee we buy, and I felt an unreasonable flood of tenderness for strangers who will never send letters in block print. I wanted to be in a life where the only surprises are ripe avocados. The cashier said, "How's your day going?" with the bright intonation of someone rewarded for cheer, and I almost told her everything just to see what would happen to the hum of the conveyor belt. Instead, I said, "Fine," because the mouth learns survival earlier than the heart. The turning point was not dramatic. It was the morning I woke and realized I had slept for 6 straight hours, and the apartment hadn't changed shape overnight. The chair was still empty. The rain had left a clean smell in the air. The coffee, yes, still metallic, but less so. The anger had cooled enough to be held without burning my palms. I could look at her without feeling the urge to inventory her sincerity. Something in me moved from the aimless middle distance of denial toward the cramped shoreline of acceptance. Not forgiveness, not yet, but a place to stand and watch the tide go out, knowing it would return in its own time. My phone buzzed on the counter, unknown number again, and for the first time, I felt ready to answer. I picked it up, thumb hovering, breath held, and pressed call back. He answered on the second ring, his voice careful, as if he were entering a dark room where furniture has been rearranged. He didn't say his name. Neither did I. We didn't owe each other intimacy, only clarity. "I won't contact her again," he said, before I could decide on a sentence. She made that clear. The line crackled faintly, city noise ghosting both ends. It struck me then how small we both were. Men in separate kitchens talking to the hum of separate refrigerators, both of us trying to breathe in a room where the air had been shared. I said thank you, because manners are a last defense when tenderness fails. Then quieter, "Don't send me another letter." He said, "Okay." We hung up like people who had placed an object back on a shelf it didn't belong. She returned that evening in the truest sense, returned to herself, or to the part of herself that had sat in our doorway and waited this out. I could see it in the way she moved, a small steadiness in the shoulders. We sat at the table with the same placemats that had witnessed the first letter and the first fault line. No melodrama, no speeches. Just the low light, the smell of rain from the balcony, and the hollow ring of two forks tapping porcelain. "I ended it," she said, a sentence with a latch that can be lifted by any wind. I nodded. The emptiness didn't rush out of the apartment. It folded itself neatly and waited to be claimed. "How do we do this?" she asked, and the quiet after the question had the texture of wool, heavy, warm, slightly suffocating. I wanted to say we don't. I wanted to say we try. I wanted to say nothing and see if silence could carry us over this thin ice. Instead, I asked for something I had read somewhere in those bad hours, a guideline meant for people who have decided that talking might, eventually, be less painful than not talking. "Can we set a time each day," I said, "to talk, and then stop, so the rest of the day can belong to us?" She nodded, relief brightening her eyes with a flicker I recognized from years ago, the quick gratitude of being given an instruction when you're desperate not to make another. In those talks, vulnerability did more work than detail. The facts mattered, the whens, the wheres, but what helped was her face when she said, "I was afraid to need you," and my hands when I said, "I was afraid to be needed wrong." We were clumsy. We repeated ourselves. The mind circles pain because it cannot bear a straight line to the heart. She apologized without begging. I listened without cross-examining. We learned to say, "Right now, I'm triggered," like people in a house with a faulty alarm who agree to stop blaming each other for the noise. One night, she placed a small box on the table. Inside was the necklace I'd given her on our first trip together, a thin chain, simple, almost nothing, but it had sat warm against her skin in so many photographs I can't look at anymore. "I took it off," she said, "when I was with him." She added no explanation, offered no defense. The honesty landed with a thud. It hurt in the way that clean wounds do, sharp, bleeding less than you think, but bright enough to make you sit down. "Thank you," I said. "For what?" "For not hiding the worst edges, for letting me choose where to cut my hands." There were still shocks. Walking home from a late movie, we passed a street where the air smelled like the cologne on that first letter, and she flinched in a way I had not seen before, a small recoil, like a hand remembering a burn. I felt something like mercy, not absolution, a loosening. We stood under a street lamp while the rain thought about returning and didn't. "I'm sorry," she said, the 1,000th repetition, and I heard how the word can thin itself out until it barely covers the skin. "We don't have to pass here again," I said. "We can take the long way home." Dignity is complicated when you've been hurt. It wants to make rules to protect you, but rules can become walls. I made one rule. No more unknown numbers, no more letters. She gave me access to everything, phones, accounts, an offering that felt both generous and strangely beside the point. Trust is not a password. It's the morning you don't need to check. Still, for a time, I checked. The relief when there was nothing to find felt like a drug I didn't want to need. We learned small rituals. She would leave her phone on the kitchen counter when she showered, not as a performance but as a habit. I would stop myself, hand hovering, and choose to pour a glass of water instead. These were not solutions. They were acknowledgments of our damage and our intent. The apartment, which had felt like a witness to a crime scene, began to feel less vigilant. The empty chair still meant loneliness some days. Other days, it was just a. On a late Sunday morning, gray light making the countertops soft, she reached for my face with a gentleness so careful it almost broke me. "I want to be the person you can forgive," she said. The cruelty of that sentence is that it asks the hurt to do another job. "I want to be the person who can forgive you," I said, and felt the truth of my own absence in the months before, the way I had drifted into my exhaustion and left her to ask for me in rooms where I did not answer. We held each other in that kitchen, like people who know embraces are not contracts, only moments of shared breath. That night, a soft knock on the door. No one we knew would knock that way, and when I opened it, a small padded envelope sat on the mat, unmarked, weightless, and suddenly unbearable in my hand. Inside the envelope, a key. No note, no explanation. A common key, one of those silver teeth that could belong to anything. We stood at the counter, the morning light making it look kinder than it had any right to be. She touched the key with the tip of one finger, as if it might recognize her. "His?" I asked. She swallowed. "Maybe," she said. The possibilities were an ache, to his place, to a storage unit of mistakes, to a door we'd never have to open. We could throw it away and keep wondering. We could try every lock in the city. The absurdity made me laugh, quiet, a sound with no joy in it but some relief. "Let's leave it," I said, and set it in the dish where our keys made their tired daily music. The dish looked too full. Morning quiet is where the real decisions happen. The day has not yet made its demands, and grief sits like a cat on the windowsill, watching. Coffee steamed between us, and for the first time since the letter, it didn't taste like metal. The rain had cleaned the street overnight. Everything looked slightly forgiven, like a face after tears. "I don't know if we can go back," she said, not as a plea but as a reading of weather. "I don't think we should," I said, surprising both of us with how calm it sounded. "But maybe we can go forward." She nodded, and in that small motion, something unclenched in the room. Forgiveness, when it came, did not announce itself. It didn't arrive on a day circled on a calendar. It arrived as a series of nothings. The afternoon I realized I hadn't thought of him for 3 hours. The evening when the song that had once gutted me became simply a song again. The Sunday I changed the sheets without imagining ghosts in the fabric. It is unfair that the hurt must work so hard to let go of the knife. It is also the only way the hand can open. We talked about staying. We talked about leaving. We walked the neighborhood, counting for and against out loud like people choosing an apartment. For history, the way she still laughs at the same foolish jokes, the ordinary goodness that returns like a shy animal when you sit quietly. Against the trust that now insists on being invited to every conversation, the parts of us that had learned to speak only when shouting. In the end, we chose neither immediately. We chose time. We chose mornings like this one, where the gray light made mercy look possible, and the city's hum sounded like an old friend you can sit beside without speaking. She took the key and placed it at the back of a drawer we rarely opened, among batteries and spare screws and an orphaned Allen wrench. Not thrown away, not displayed, a truth out of sight but acknowledged in inventory. "We'll know it's there," she said, "and we'll know we don't need it." The sentence felt like a small ceremony, a way to bless an object that had tried to make itself a god. Later, while she slept on the couch, afternoon light making a pale river across the floor, I sat in the empty chair and understood what letting go might actually mean. It didn't mean forgetting. It didn't mean pretending this was a chapter in a book with a happy ending guaranteed by the genre. It meant choosing not to pick at the scab when it itched. It meant letting the story of us be larger than the day it almost ended. It meant accepting that I will be triggered, that she will apologize, that some days we will handle it with grace and others we will be small and tired and unkind, and that this, too, is human. We won't reunite in the way movies reward you for watching. There will be no final kiss in the rain that washes the past clean. There will be mornings when the rain smells like regret and evenings when the room feels crowded by all we don't say. There will also be the smell of coffee, the soft sound of her footsteps, the quiet of a city learning to be kind under gray skies. Forgiveness without reunion is still forgiveness. Love without possession is still love. We can carry it carefully until it finds its own shape. On the last morning of this story, if stories have last mornings, I woke before her and watched the light pull itself across the kitchen like a slow tide. I made coffee. I washed the 2 cups from yesterday and did not think of who else had once held anything of ours. I opened the window and let the cool air in. The traffic whispered. The building sighed. I placed 2 slices of bread in the toaster and stood with my hands resting on the counter, feeling the vibration of the machine, small, steady. She stirred on the couch and pulled the blanket closer. I didn't wake her. Some quiet belongs to the person asleep. Some quiet belongs to the person finally able to stand still. When she did wake, we spoke lightly about errands, about laundry, about how the plant on the windowsill had survived another week because she remembered to turn it, and I felt a warmth that wasn't the manic relief of survival, but the ordinary reassurance that life will continue doing what it does best when allowed. Continue, the key in the drawer didn't grow teeth at night, the letter in the bin didn't reassemble itself, the past refused to change, and that refusal was its gift. It freed the present from performance. Ending, there was no speech, no vow. Only the soft clink of her cup meeting the saucer and the morning light touching the edge of the table like a hand. And in that touch, a release so quiet it could be mistaken for breath. A release so quiet it could be mistaken for breath.